Can you imagine that you're out for a celebratory night with friends when all of a sudden you black out, later coming to but unable to remember where you are or what happened to you? That was the terrifying reality of one young man from Manchester who would become the victim of one of the most evil serial predators in history.
This is Reynard Sinaga, as he wanted the world to see him. His social media accounts full of grinning photos of a student having fun. But Sinaga has many faces, and behind the mask lies the truth. A depraved monster said by prosecutors to be one of the most prolific rapists in the world.
Now, this victim is sharing his shocking story of surviving his nightmarish encounter with this monster. How did he end up finding out the truth about what exactly happened to him? Let's keep watching to find out. This victim, identified only by his first name, Daniel, decided to come forward after going through this horrific experience because he thinks it's important for the world to know that it's not just women who can become victims of assault. There are many male victims too. But it can be especially hard for them to open up about their experience. When Daniel decided to share his story, many urged him to hide his face so people wouldn't be able to identify him. But he decided against this, saying he has nothing to be ashamed of. Daniel began his story by describing the night he would encounter one of the most infamous predators in history. It started as a great night. It was his birthday, and he was enjoying an evening with friends, sharing food and sipping cocktails. Manchester's just buzzing. It was new, it was different. When everyone finishes work, everyone goes out. I felt like it was a mini London. Yeah, I loved it. After a while, it was time to leave, so Daniel's friends went outside to wait for a taxi. But Daniel had to use the restroom, so he stepped aside to a back alleyway. Moments later, everything went black. The next thing Daniel knew, he was waking up on a couch that was not his own, with no memories of what happened after he walked into that alleyway. It was as if the whole rest of the night had just slipped from his mind. I just sort of went up an alleyway, and that's it. I don't remember anything after that. I was on a couch when I woke up, fully dressed. I just sort of opened my eyes, and I felt groggy. I didn't feel right, but I thought, this is like a hangover, and you don't know what's happened. I just laid there for 5 or 10 minutes, trying to piece it together. Could not remember anything. But what Daniel soon realized was that this wasn't just an ordinary hangover caused by his celebrations the night before. This was something far darker and more sinister. As Daniel tried to piece together what was going on and where he was, he looked to his side and noticed someone's feet walking out of the room. He didn't know if it was one of his friends or a complete stranger. But the one thing he did know was that he was in an unfamiliar place and likely in danger. So he pulled himself to his feet and ran out the door as fast as he could. Daniel hoped that his partner or one of the friends he had been celebrating with the night before would fill in the blanks about what had happened and how he ended up in a strange apartment. But once he arrived home, he would discover that they were all just as confused as he was, claiming he had just disappeared without a trace, causing them all to worry. And then, yeah, I got home, and he said, "Where have you been?" Like, "I've been calling the hospitals and worried sick." What happened? How did you just go? Obviously, he accused me of, "Where have you been? Who have you been with?" And, I knew I hadn't done anything like that. I knew that wasn't in me. But I couldn't explain where I'd been. Daniel was still confused and disoriented. For the first time, he suspected he may have been drugged while out the night before. Was it possible that someone had slipped something into his drink? Even suspecting that someone may have tried to take advantage of him, Daniel did not think to call the cops. After all, he had no proof. That is, until later in 2017, when a major headline hit the news in Greater Manchester. A young student named Reynard Sinaga had been arrested, and the crimes he was accused of were nothing less than shocking. The cops claimed that they had found evidence on Sinaga's electronic devices that connected him to more than 200 victims of assault-related crimes. It was an incredible number. How could one person be responsible for hurting that many people and manage to get away with it? Not only that, but Sinaga would record these horrific assaults on camera and then save the footage on his computer and other devices so he could watch it back later. In many cases, his victims were drugged and didn't even know that they were being recorded when this was happening to them. It would come as a disturbing shock to Daniel when the cops arrived at his front door one day to talk to him about Sinaga. They suspected he could have been a victim of Kaga without realizing it at first. There was no way he thought that this could be possible. But when he looked into the eyes of one of the female officers, he realized that she recognized him from the disturbing footage evidence they had found on Kaga's devices. That was when the reality set in, of what actually happened that strange time he woke up confused and disoriented after a night of partying. Reinhard Kaga had drugged him, taken him back to his apartment, and assaulted him. He then took pictures of him when he was unconscious. When the police turned up, I could see the way she looked at me, that she recognized me. And I'm so... Daniel didn't want to believe that this was true, that he was truly one of Reinhard's over 200 victims. But tragically, the cops had proof. They showed him pictures they found on Kaga's phone. One of them was a picture of his arm that showed Daniel's unique tattoos. It was then that any doubt he had was erased, and he had to accept that this really happened to him. Daniel described the sickening feeling he experienced when he saw the photos of himself lying in such a vulnerable state, completely unaware of what was being done to him without his consent. In fact, he said that he appeared to be so still and out of it in the pictures that it almost looked like he was dead. 'Cause at first, when I saw one of the photos, I said, "No, I don't think that's me, you know." And then I looked again. And, it's just horrible to see yourself that vulnerable in photos that someone else has taken. And you know, and you can see that I'm chatting, that it's horrible to say. Daniel said that he experienced a small bit of relief when the cops explained what had been done to him and that they knew who was responsible. He no longer had to lay awake at night wondering how he had ended up on that couch in that strange apartment. The mystery was over. But at the same time, he knew he would never be the same again, knowing that he had been victimized this way, and there was nothing he could do to change it. I so wish it wouldn't have happened. Through the support of his family and friends, Daniel has had to put his life back together since finding out what happened to him. But tragically, he is only one of many other victims that have had to do the same as a result of Reinhard's monstrous actions. So who exactly is Reinhard Kaga, and how did he become one of the most notorious predators in history? How did he get away with so many crimes? And would he ever end up facing justice for what he did to Daniel and so many others? The story begins on February 19, 1983, when Reinhard Kaga was born into an incredibly wealthy family in Indonesia. His father was a successful real estate entrepreneur and banker who even owned his own palm oil plantation. Reinhard grew up in a lavish mansion and had everything he could want, including servants who were constantly around to carry out his every wish. But despite his wealth, Reinhard was a social outcast with few friends. He was very quiet and mostly kept to himself, spending a lot of his time reading or playing music. Still, there were no definite signs from his childhood that would suggest to anyone who knew him what kind of monster he would one day become. Reinhard attended private school, where he performed well academically, but his strange mannerisms led to teasing from classmates. It wasn't until after high school, during his college years, that Reinhard began to change, and slowly develop into the cunning but charming predator that would win over countless victims. He became more popular and made many friends. His personality seemed to evolve, and he developed a new sense of confidence. Reinhard ended up moving to the UK in 2007 to pursue further studies at the University of Manchester. He earned 2 master's degrees, one in urban planning and another in sociology. It was then that he settled into the nightlife scene of Manchester, which would later serve as the setting for many of his horrific crimes. It was here, in the bustling nightclubs of the city, that Reinhard began to wrestle with his sexual preferences. Although he had always suspected that he was attracted to men, living in conservative Indonesia had forced him to suppress these feelings. But in Manchester, Reinhard finally felt free to explore his true identity. He became more outgoing, making friends with people who shared similar interests, and he involved himself in the social scene. Reinhard's life seemed ideal on the surface. He was a great student, receiving generous financial support from his parents, and he lived completely carefree. He frequently went out clubbing, and while his parents funded his lifestyle, he was content in the role of just being a student and not having to work a real job. But behind this facade, something much darker was brewing within him. By 2011, Reinhard had moved into a small apartment in Manchester's gay village, a district known for its vibrant LGBTQ+ community. However, by this time, his personality had begun to change. People started to notice that he was super narcissistic and self-absorbed. He seemed consumed by his own image. He withdrew from his old friends and made new ones through nightclubs. His relationships were often brief, intense, and very rocky. Sometimes, He would make strange jokes to his friends about what he would do to get a potential lover to fall for him. Little did they know at the time that he was actually being completely serious. Reinhard would text his friends, boasting of sexual conquests. They thought he was joking when he quoted song lyrics about using a secret potion, of which one drop should be enough. Reinhard was known to be very possessive while he was in a relationship with someone, and if he thought that they were thinking about leaving him, he would threaten to hurt himself to get them to stay. He became more isolated, spending much of his time on dating apps and social media, doing his best to present himself as some kind of celebrity. Reinhard's behavior became more erratic, and by 2014, his truly dark and disturbing nature began to emerge. One night, after befriending a young man at a club, he slipped a sedative into the man's drink, lured him to his apartment, and brutally took advantage of him while the man was unconscious. When the young man woke up the next day, he had no memory of how he ended up in Reinhard's apartment. It was very similar to the horrific story of what had happened to Daniel. When the young man woke up, he, like Daniel, had no idea that he had been taken advantage of the night before. He just thought that he had too much to drink and that some thoughtful person had let him spend the night while he slept it off. He was very grateful and could have never imagined that he had just become one of the very first known victims of Reinhard. Over the next 2 years, Reinhard continued his attacks. He targeted young, intoxicated men, often in their early 20s, who were out partying in Manchester. He would spot them outside clubs and approach them in a very friendly and welcoming way. He would often offer them a place to rest or a drink. These men never imagined that by accepting his seemingly kind offer, they would be walking into a trap that would change their lives forever. Night after night, Reinhard would leave his Manchester flat to go and find victims. He took advantage of living in the city center, amongst the nightclubs and bars, and he made the streets outside them his hunting ground. Once they were both inside his apartment, Reinhard would drug them with a substance that would cause them to fall unconscious. They were defenseless and unable to understand anything that was happening to them. It was then that Reinhard would be able to assault them and have his way with them without ever being detected. Reinhard's victims were often too intoxicated or disoriented to realize what had happened to them. Even when the sedation wore off, many woke up in his apartment feeling confused and embarrassed, but they couldn't remember the details of the assault. Some even apologized for their behavior, unaware that they were the ones who had been victimized by him. Reinhard would often wait for drunk men to come stumbling out of a nightclub and then entice them around the corner to his flat, which was just next door. He'd offer them somewhere to have a drink or phone a taxi, and on one occasion, it took him just 60 seconds to pick up a victim. Reinhard, like the truly sick monster he was, kept extremely careful records of his crimes. He filmed the assaults, sometimes leaving the victims unconscious for hours so that he could continue to violate them. He also kept trophies from his victims. These often included things like IDs, credit cards, and clothing. These trophies served as reminders of his power and control. The videos he recorded were horrifyingly long, with one lasting an entire 8 hours as he continued to insult his victim without hesitation. Clearly, Reinhard was such an arrogant and overconfident person that he truly didn't think he would ever get caught. He was brazen in his attacks. What kind of criminal keeps such careful records of his crimes? He was keeping all of the evidence carefully tucked away so that law enforcement could one day use it against him. But he wasn't the least bit worried about this because he fully believed nobody would ever catch on to what he was doing. Despite the extreme nature of his crimes, Reinhard's appearance and demeanor allowed him to blend in. He was very young-looking, with perfect manners and a charming personality. This made him appear harmless to his victims. He knew how to gain their trust, and once they were in his apartment, they were at his mercy. Over time, Reinhard's attacks escalated, and he became bolder in his actions. But he also became more sloppy with his crimes due to his overconfidence. It was only a matter of time until he slipped up so badly that not even he could talk himself out of it. Nearly 200, mostly heterosexual men, made this journey, disappearing inside Sanaga's apartment block. They'd be offered drinks spiked with a drug like GHB, and that was the last they'd remember. By 2017, one of his victims, an 18-year-old rugby player named Peter, fought back. Peter had been drugged and horribly assaulted, but managed to regain enough consciousness to confront Reinhard. What followed was a brutal fight, during which Peter attacked and viciously beat Reinhard badly enough that he had to be hospitalized. But after everything was over, Peter had managed to escape. Peter went to the cops and told them everything. Despite his story, They saw how badly Reinhard was injured and believed that he had been the actual victim. It wasn't until they looked through Reinhard's phone that the cops discovered the horrifying truth. Peter hadn't been lying to them. He truly was a victim of Reinhard. But he was far from the only one. They couldn't believe what they saw on his phone. The rapist had filmed each of his attacks. They found hundreds of hours of video. The cops discovered countless incredibly disturbing recordings that captured shocking crimes. Reinhard had been filming nearly all of his assaults. This discovery led to his arrest. Later, a search of his apartment revealed hundreds of videos, photographs, and trophies. There were more than 800 videos spanning 2.5 years. The investigation revealed the full scale of Reinhard Sinaga's crimes, which took place between 2015 and 2017. There were at least 26 confirmed victims, but there are likely many more who have never come forward. A lot of these victims were abused more than once. Many of them did not even know they had been taken advantage of by Reinhard until the cops found the video evidence, identified them, and told them the horrifying truth. As far as the judicial process is concerned, probably anywhere in the world, he's the most prolific rapist that's come through the courts, one official stated. I would say in the world, certainly in the British courts. Reinhard ended up pleading not guilty to every charge against him. This was one of the cruelest things his victims would have to endure, the videos of themselves being assaulted shown to a jury in a courtroom. It took 4 separate trials to reach a complete verdict. During the trial, the church that Reinhard supposedly once attended, a liberal congregation of the Church of England, provided a character reference for him. But this wouldn't be enough to convince anyone of his innocence. It is almost beyond belief that someone who could profess some Christian faith could, at the same time, have been committing such wicked and evil crimes, said the judge presiding over one of his trials. At the end of the 4th trial, Reinhard was finally convicted on more than 150 counts of horrific assault and abuse. Tragically, the cops were never able to track down many of his believed victims. We believe there are over 190 victims that have been involved with Sinaga, investigators said. And 70 of them are still to be identified. Reinhard was given 88 concurrent life sentences for his crimes and must serve at least 40 years behind bars before he is eligible for parole. Nevertheless, just about everyone would agree that this is someone who doesn't deserve to see freedom ever again. For as long as he lives, Reinhard Sinaga has shown no remorse. The judge remarked that he even seemed to enjoy being sentenced in court. How many more possible victims of Reinhard Sinaga could there be throughout Manchester and beyond? Will the full truth of this monster's crimes ever come out? Only time will tell. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, stay safe.